I'm James Beckwith, President and CEO of Five Star Bank. As a community bank, we believe that open dialogue about the issues affecting our region is vitally important. From the economy to the environment to social issues, we look forward to the conversations and hope you'll join in.
Welcome to Studio Sacramento. I'm your host, Scott Syfax. Today's program is produced in partnership with the American Leadership Forum, a regional organization where leaders come together to unite, strengthen, and serve for the benefit of our entire community. ALF is responsible for today's topic and helped develop its content. An estimated 4,200 people are homeless in the Sacramento region. The number of homeless families with children is on the rise, and there are concerns that cutbacks in health and mental health services in 2011, it will end with the needs of our homeless population far outstripping available resources. Joining us today, Bill Kennedy, Managing Attorney of Legal Services of Northern California, and Ginger Rutland, Associate Editor and member of the editorial board of the Sacramento Bee. Welcome to the program.
Thank you,
Thank
Scott.
you for having us.
Bill, describe for us, what is the homeless situation in the Sacramento region today?
People tend to want to understand homelessness in terms of a snapshot, to paint a picture of who is homeless this year and what are their situations. I think it's more easily and better understood if we think of it in terms of streams of people who became homeless and why they became that way. And I think that you can link modern homelessness to a number of decisions that were made that led to the expansion of the homeless population. First being the closure of the state mental hospitals. The idea in the late 60s when state mental hospitals were to be closed were that we're going to create a community mental health system to care for people in the community. Well, that never happened. The hospitals were closed and it left mentally ill people on the street. A second wave of homelessness began when Vietnam veterans returned. And some of the things that they struggled with were the VA's refusal to recognize post-traumatic stress disorder as a problem. And that led a lot of people basically a lot of veterans to decades of homelessness. We've seen other local decisions such as the reduction of 3,000 single-room occupancy homes in downtown Sacramento. They were the primary residences of people on disability, people who earn $700, $800 a month as disability pensions. And the only housing available to them was reduced now to about 700 or 800 units. That left a lot of disabled people on the street. Certainly, we have seen waves of children graduating out of foster care. We have seen the reduction of general assistance payments below rent levels. And finally, we've seen welfare being time limited, so that earlier this decade, the largest and fastest growing group of people who are homeless are women and children who are timing out of welfare. Finally, we are now decommissioning 190,000 troops from the Iraq-Afghanistan war. They're returning home, and a very large number of women in the military are expected to become homeless. 30% become homeless within the first 6 months of discharge. Men become homeless too, but there is a unusual situation here where we're seeing an extremely high number of women discharged from the service becoming homeless. So that is the latest stream of people entering into the homeless population. The reason it's better to understand it in terms of streams is when you're looking for solutions, the snapshot doesn't help. But understanding the origin and the struggles that each of these groups have open the door to solutions.
Well, Ginger, in terms of looking for solutions, this issue seems to never go away. It ebbs and flows, but it never seems to go away. What's the current state of the dialogue as the Bee sees it from the reporting that's been done?
I think there are debates about who's worthy of help, right? We generally see children as worthy of help. We generally see the mentally ill as worthy of help. We're less concerned with people who have substance abuse. And so we tend, at least in the past, we tended not to address their concerns. We had this puritanical notion that you had to get sober before you could be offered housing. We've learned a lot in the intervening years.
What's the consequence of taking an approach like that? We're saying, no, before you can have housing, you've got to be sober first. What's the consequence of that?
If you want somebody clean and sober, they can't get clean and sober sleeping on the streets and sleeping in a park and sleeping in their car. It won't happen. So we begin to understand that. And we are now building homes, facilities, communities that in fact have a component of services with them that protect people or help people become sober, help people get off drugs. And they have to have a clean, safe place to live before they can address their underlying problems.
Now, one statistic that I recently heard was that there have been some successes that have taken place in the region over the past few years in reducing certain aspects of the homeless population or getting them toward a more permanent solution. Can you describe that?
Well, I think that picking up on what Ginger said is there has been a shift in thought on how it is that we need to address the problem of homelessness. And that shift to what is called a housing first model, which suggests that it's important to stabilize a person in housing before you can deal with the problems such as post-traumatic stress disorder, lack of a job, mental illness, that we need to house them first. So when the 10-year plan to end homelessness began in 2006, it took the Housing First model, and it chose to focus on the most difficult population, those who had been homeless for more than a decade. From 2007 to 2009, the chronic homeless population was reduced by 30%. From 2009 to 2011, the chronic homeless population, again, the most difficult, through this Housing First model, was reduced by another 25%.
Give us a little bit more detail. How did that have such dramatic results?
Well, first, the shift in attitude that you don't have to clear several hurdles before we will help you. It's we're going to put you in housing, we're going to provide supports in that housing.
Which is exactly the point you were making.
Yes.
It's a different philosophical approach. But secondly, we had the federal government's investment from the ARRA, the Stimulus Act. And that, in fact, put $8 million into Sacramento County to create what is called the Housing First model, to put people into housing, and for those in housing who are likely to become homeless, to stabilize them in that housing by creating housing supports, financial supports to pay rent, and by creating supportive services for people in housing. 1,800 people were served during the 2 years of the Homeless Prevention and Rapid Rehousing Act. And one thing I think that is real important, for the first time since I've been here in Sacramento for 20 plus years, we saw movement through the shelters. People were moving out of the shelters and into housing. So we didn't have so many people sleeping on the street. Each night there were more people staying in the shelters and staying for a shorter period of time.
So in essence, the continuum worked.
It not only works, but what people understand, this isn't just about altruism. There is a cost, a big cost for society as a whole, particularly the healthcare community, in not addressing these folks, because what they do is end up in emergency rooms. So you saw big healthcare concerns saying, I will donate to this program because if I don't get these chronically sick, chronically ill, chronically overdosed people into some housing and I don't get them help, they end up in my emergency room, and it's extremely costly for everybody. And I think business communities need to understand that as well, and the public needs to understand, to the extent that we resist the notion of putting supportive housing, low-income housing in our communities. We pay for it in other ways that are very disruptive and very costly.
Let's talk about that debate for a second. Generally, from your vantage point, how do you see the arguments forming up between the advocates for the homeless population and the different aspects of the community that tend to be resistant?
People are afraid of poor people. People are afraid of people who are mentally ill. People are afraid of they're afraid of them. And they are unattractive, and they think they bring down property values, and all of those things happen, but they will not go away unless they have a place to stay. And if we give them supportive housing, I think people need to understand that everybody's better off. The society is better off, and they are better off, your communities are better off, and those communities that once resisted low-income housing, particularly where there was a lot of government support, and failed, meaning that the low-income housing was in fact built and people moved in, have now become advocates for that kind of housing because, frankly, it's a model that often works better than market rate housing, where there is not the hammer of government and the hammer of if you misbehave, you lose your housing, and the kinds of incentives that encourage people to live good lives and be good neighbors.
Now, you've been out, Ginger, on these counts where you go out and count the homeless and the like. What are some of the things in going out and doing that sort of work as a part of your reporting that you've learned about the population that maybe most of us don't?
You know, what is shocking is one thinks of the homeless as concentrated somewhere near downtown of Sacramento or along the rivers. But you go out in the suburbs and you go up above the freeways and you know those trees and plant work that's on the freeways. There are homeless encampments, people in tents camped out there, hundreds of them. You go into these big parking lots at the malls. There are people living in cars with their children in these parking lots at night where you and I parked and we went in and went shopping. At night, they are a campground for homeless. They are everywhere. They're not just in downtown Sacramento. They're not just on the American River Parkway. They are everywhere.
Well, Bill, that actually leads to a perception that many have that Sacramento City proper is ground zero, for lack of a better term, for the homeless population. In fact, the homeless being spread throughout the region, are all of the regional governments and the like coordinating with each other?
They are not, but there is a new initiative called Sacramento Steps Forward that is reaching out to all the governments in the region who are facing, trying to address the issues of homelessness and trying to come up with a solution that makes sense for the region. If we define ourselves in political jurisdictions, we argue over who can deliver what, and there actually is a race to the bottom. But if we define ourselves in terms of economic sense, this is an economic region. It creates jobs, it creates wealth, and it creates poverty. And that poverty tends to fall across political jurisdictions. Why not address the problem economically? If we address the problem economically, we can look to the homeless that are in Placer and El Dorado County, the homeless that are in Yolo, the homeless that cross all of the city jurisdictions, and try to figure out what is the best way to address homelessness in the region. Sacramento Steps Forward is a new public-private partnership that will ask the public sector to coordinate regionally and ask the private sector to bring in innovation to address, to bring new innovation and new ways to address this.
A public-private partnership, you know, a cynic might automatically say that's another layer of bureaucracy, which is just going to peel off more dollars. Why would having this new Sacramento Steps Forward organization or partnership be any better than what we've got in terms of service delivery through the local government?
Let's look at the origin of Sacramento Steps Forward. A decade ago, the County of Sacramento put $8 million of general funds into homeless services a year. 2 years ago, they reduced that to zero.
Zero.
Zero. No general fund money is going into homeless services. So the county is pulling out. $24 million in federal funds for homelessness come into the region, but it requires a match of $1.8 million. That match is no longer being raised by Sacramento County or by the local governments. The private sector must step forward to create that match. Otherwise, we not only lose the $8 million in general funds that Sacramento was putting into it, but we lose $24 million in federal funds.
Actually, the Bee reported back in September that the county, during the winter months, I guess, spent $700,000 per year on beds, and this year it's $150,000.
Right. For the winter shelter program, the county is putting in $150,000. The city has put in $100,000. So together it's $250,000 for what is a really thin safety net for homeless people during the coldest months of the year. And that money is being used primarily for hotel vouchers for families with children, for the disabled, and for the elderly. And everybody else is kind of on their own. And you talk to Sacramento Sacramento emergency housing folks, in the month of October and September, those 2 months, they turned down 150 children who were looking for shelter. Children in our community were looking for shelter. In the month of November, last month, when they got that money from the city and the county, they reduced that number somewhat, something like 100 children instead. But there are dire situations out there, and we need, what folks need are some help from the public, and we also need a greater commitment from government. I mean, we do need, government can't abandon this population. We need both the public, the private sector, and the public sector to join hands on this.
I just would like to clarify, the funds that you've identified were not general funds.
Yes,
Okay.
they weren't.
They were not. And so still the reduction to zero of general funds, of local tax dollars, is different. And there also we have a shelter system and a homeless services system. Both are maintained through separate revenue streams. Both are very constricted over the past decade.
So with regards to the lack of shelter beds and the like, there's been a lot of discussion about permanent facilities versus temporary shelters, and those shelters are characterized as everything from tent cities to small barracks, things like that. What exactly is that initiative, and where does it stand today?
That's very controversial in this town. There's a movement called Safe Ground, in which those people who live in tents along the American River Parkway, for the most part, and near, anyway, on empty land, anywhere that they can find. They keep being moved from place to place to place. They are there for a couple of weeks, a couple of days, and then the cops come in and move them, and they say you have to move along. So they move down the river, or they move to a different lot. Those people are tired of being rousted, and they have this program that they want to put in place called Safe Ground, which would give them a permanent place that they can legally be. It's evolved. It's no longer thought of as a tent city. The people who are proposing it are suggesting that they build sort of tough-like sheds, and that they have services, and that they have communal place where they can do meals, and that they have some place where they can just store their belongings. And I think that is not a model for everyone, but it is a model that could work. And Sacramento, the city and the county are reluctant to approve it because no community wants it in their community.
Well,
so it's a political hot potato.
And just, for full disclosure sake, since I happen to be involved with a pretty significant project near where many of these facilities that serve this population are, I understand the argument very, very well. And primarily it seems to stem from the fact that a lot of people are on board with the concept of transitional housing and permanent housing. It's ironic that that many times people resist things that they tout as being wonderful, like Quinn Cottages or Cerna Village, things like that. But the characterization of Safe Ground has been, this is merely moving the situation that has been on the American River Parkway, to a more permanent location with all of the things that come along with that. And there is not, I think that there is a very fundamental disagreement between whether or not the focus needs to be on more permanent housing or whether it should be on more of this type of just let's get people some sort of addressing of their needs immediately. Now, there's actually a bit of a disagreement even within the homeless advocacy community on this. Can you speak to that, Ginger?
Well, the people of goodwill on both sides of this issue, there's some people who like it, who say we ought to give it a chance. And then there are the other side that say we can't put people in what they consider substandard housing, that means that we create a different kind of housing standards for people who are poor and desperate. And that's the wrong way to go. I sort of disagree, because the choice isn't between standard and substandard housing. The choice is between sleeping on the river in a tent in this cold weather and having some sort of shelter and having a safe place to be. Bill, what's your thoughts?
Well, the important thing to understand is we're talking about solutions that don't exist. And each night there's going to be 1,800 people sleeping outside because we don't have shelters for them. I like to view Safe Ground, which I support, as a stepping stone. Until we have a place for you to go inside, why should you have to move on every day? Understand that some people are trying to stabilize themselves and to save the money. Many of them work, and they're living in tents, trying to get the $1,500 to $2,000 it will take to get them inside. They don't want to give up all of their belongings and have to carry everything with them wherever they go, to and from work, to and from job interviews. A campground gives them a place where they can keep their things in safety as they go out, try and find work, try and find health care, try and find the things that they need to leave homelessness. Therefore, having a Safe Ground, I think, makes a lot of sense as an interim step. I understand those who say that we shouldn't have a lesser housing for certain people, but we have no housing.
Yes.
Safe Ground makes sense until we can build housing for all people who need it.
How do you respond, though? I do have to ask this question. How do you respond to those who say that, okay, if Safe Ground is such a good idea, let's put it out in Granite Bay. Let's put it in the fabulous 40s. Let's put it over in Pocket. The concentration of services that are all within the downtown area, for those who have interests in those areas, they say, look, we've got our fair share. Where's the rest of the region?
And that's a legitimate complaint. And we should, if we're going to have a Safe Ground type facility, we ought to move it to other parts of Sacramento, where there are large concentrations of homeless. But the reality is there are large concentrations of homeless in the River District, for example, just to name one, where the Volunteers of America have their shelter now. There was a campground there and had been for years. It had been there for years. And when shelters had were overflowing in the 90s, and that's where people were allowed to camp for years. They are now being hustled away from those areas every night, and so they're hiding under bushes. Why not create a legitimate place for them to be? They're going to be either there or hiding under a bush somewhere there. So for me, I think the argument about fair share, should they be in Curtis Park, Land Park, and other places, there are frankly homeless in Curtis Park. There are homeless in Land Park. People don't know that, but they are hiding in the parks around there. They are there. And should we create more places for them in those communities? Absolutely.
All right, we're down to our last 30 seconds, and so I want to do some predictions. Let's talk about 2012 and beyond. What in 2012 and beyond do you see happening with this issue, and what positive thing might take place?
I don't know what will take place, but I tell you what I'd like to see. I'd like to see more people become advocates for the homeless. And I mean advocates in terms of providing—
You got about 5 seconds.
Okay, providing money, but also providing the political support that says, I will have low-income housing in my community.
And Bill, you have about 5 seconds now.
The public-private partnership will bring innovation to services and create a new way and hopefully more successful way of taking people off the streets and into homes.
Okay. And that is our show. I want to thank the American Leadership Forum for its partnerships and our guests, Bill Kennedy and Ginger Rutland. There's lots of talk on television, but only a few places where you can be a part of the conversations that matter. I'm Scott Syphax, and you've been watching Studio Sacramento. Join us next time, right here on KVIE.
I'm James Beckwith, President and CEO of Five Star Bank. As a community bank, we believe that open dialogue about the issues affecting our region is vitally important. From the economy to the environment to social issues, we look forward to the conversations and hope you'll join in.